Hey, hello, and welcome to those of you who've just joined us in the workshop. Great to be here with you all today. I can see our attendee numbers are slowly creeping up, but I'm sure we'll have a few more people join. But I know we've got a lot to cover in our training today, so I think in the interest of time, we'll get started. Firstly, just a big welcome on behalf of myself, Fiona from the UN Sustainable Stock Exchanges team, for joining us all in today's session. Great to be here with you. We're here today for the first of our two-part training program on gender equality in capital markets. So as a number of you have done, it's great to see your introductions in the chat. So please feel free to continue to share. But as we're getting started, I'd like to say a big thank you, firstly, to the Egyptian Exchange for hosting today's training workshop and making this program possible. We really appreciate all of your support to bring us together. As you'll see, this program is really a very collaborative effort. A number of thanks also various partners. Firstly, colleagues at IFC, the International Finance Corporation, to UN Women, to Columbia University, and with the support of the Luxembourg government as well. So thank you all. To get us started now, I'm very pleased to welcome our first opening speaker that we have joining us here today. I'm just going to change the order of these around if that's okay. I'm very pleased to welcome my colleague Amira El Said Agag, who is the Middle East ESG Projects Manager and Team Lead for IFC. So a big thank you, Amira, for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you, Fiona, and hello and good afternoon, everybody. Hope you can hear me. It's really a pleasure to be here today to introduce a program that is not only timely, but as you will see, essential to building stronger, more inclusive, and more resilient markets. Since its launch in 2023, the Gender Equality Training Program has made remarkable progress. In just a short time, it has been delivered across 29 different markets, reaching over 6,000 participants. Imagine. This scale definitely reflects both the global relevance and the strong demand for practical, market-focused sort of guidance on how to advance it. And do you know what makes this program particularly impactful? I think it is structured, step-by-step approach, and through four carefully designed modules that is both accessible and actionable. The training does not just raise awareness, it equips individuals and also organizations with the needed tools that they can immediately apply in their own contexts. As Fiona mentioned, this program is the result of a strong and purposeful collaboration. The content was developed jointly by UNSSE and IFC, drawing on IFC Women on Boards in Business Leadership Program, implemented in partnership with the government of Luxembourg. This collaboration brings together deep expertise from across the ecosystem, ensuring that this training is both credible and practical. Delivery is equally collaborative. The program is implemented in partnership with UN Women and is enriched by expert contributions from leading organizations such as Bloomberg, Luxembourg Stock Exchange, the EDGE Certified Foundation, and those perspectives ensure that participants like you benefit from real-world insights and global best practice. This multi-stakeholder approach of this program fosters dialogue, fosters shared learning and collective actions, all of which are essential for driving systemic change. Importantly, the program also engages men as part of the solution. Today, 33% of participants are men, underscoring the understanding that advancing gender equality requires inclusive participation and shared responsibility. So, in closing, this training program is more than a learning experience. It is a catalyst for change. By building knowledge, shifting perspectives, and equipping actors like you with practical tools, it is helping to unlock both social and economic value. Thank you so much, and pleasure in meeting each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amira. And as ever, thank you to IFC's support for this program and our ongoing collaboration. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us. I see we also have Rehab who's joined us. So I believe Rehab will be stepping in to the opening remarks. Is that correct? But if I could just introduce you briefly. So Rehab is the head of international relations at EGX. So thank you for being with us. And I'll pass over to you now. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Rehab, we don't seem to be able to hear you at the moment.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. I'd like first to start with that when we talk about gender equality, most of us may often see that it's a matter of values, social conversation, or simply fairness. But in reality, what we're gonna talk about today in the session and in going in depth is that we're talking about real growth in exchanges, performance, economic values, and opportunities. So gender equality is not just a fundamental right or a sustainable development goal. It's a driver to performance. So resilience and even growth in exchange. So I think actually the sustainability team here for their great work, Mustafa and Mayar, and the UNSSE and everybody here, the IFC, all of you. And on behalf of the Egyptian Exchange, it's my great pleasure to welcome you today into this webinar for gender equality and global market and global capital markets, which is organized in collaboration with the UNSSE and the Women and UN Women. In the Egyptian Exchange, I have to stress that we believe that empowering women is actually, as I said, it's not just a sustainability goal. No, it's actually we consider it as essential to building more inclusive, transparent, and even competitive financial ecosystem. So, and this commitment for the Egyptian Exchange actually is not new to us, as we became signatories to the Women Empowerment Principles in 2016. And we are also proud to have played a pioneering role globally by hosting the first training in the gender equality and global capital markets. That was in, I think, May 2024. And importantly, we have made tangible progress at also the regulation level. So if I have to state facts, when we see that in 2021, the Egyptian Financial Regulatory Authority had required at least 25% female representation in the board, or at least minimum of 2. And today, as we speak, and even since a few years ago, this requirement was embedded in the Egyptian Exchange's listing rules. So our efforts have been also recognized internationally, and that's with pleasure that in 2026, the Egyptian Exchange was acknowledged by the World Federation of Exchanges for our achievements in the women empowerment, which is reflecting our commitment and the real progress in that front. And then as an active member, being an active member in the UNSSE since 2012, we see capital markets as powerful platform for changing such initiatives. And in today's session, we will equip you with tools to better understand the financial implications of gender equality, to improve internal practices, and to strengthen how gender performance is measured in exchanges. So I encourage each of you and everyone that is joining this initiative today to actively engage. Please spread the word, and most importantly, translate today's discussions into concrete actions within your organizations. And because advancing gender equality is not just about inclusion, it is about unlocking full potential of our economies and our markets. Thank you for joining us today. I wish you a highly productive and inspiring session. And now please allow me to give the floor back to the SSE. Thank you very much for having us today.
Thank you very much, Rehab. Really appreciate you taking the time to share those comments, and great as ever to be collaborating with your exchange, as you say, over many years now. So really appreciate your ongoing support. So thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll just reshare the slide presentation now. And then from my side, I'm just going to cap off a few kind of agenda points as we get started on the session, just so we're clear on how we'll run the format for our training today before we start to get into the content. So today's training is really looking at that interface between gender equality and global markets. So as many of you may already feel, and as we heard already there, gender equality and finance can be both sensitive as well as complex topics. So rather than pretending that that complexity doesn't exist, what we're aiming to do in our training today is to better understand it and to identify how we can move forward. So in today's training, we'll be particularly focusing on understanding those complexities. And then in our second training workshop on Wednesday, we're going to get into some of the action-oriented mechanisms that we can take to advance gender equality in our organizations. So just to mention in terms of housekeeping, thanks to all of those who've shared your comments in the chat already. So please feel free to continue to use the chat to share any general comments as we move through the training. We'll also be sharing a number of links throughout the training there as well, so do keep an eye out for those. Secondly, if you have particular questions for the team, please make sure to put those into the Q&A box, which you should also have available on your bottom toolbar in Zoom. If you just put your questions, particularly in the Q&A, that makes sure that we can track and directly respond to those for you as well. So as you know, we've got a 2-hour session today, and we'll be back again for our second part of the training in another 2-hour session on Wednesday. As I've already mentioned, you're very free to ask your questions throughout the training in the Q&A. Please do make the most of that opportunity to ask what you'd like to know. You'll see in a moment we've got a number of expert panelists joining us today, so do make the most of that opportunity to ask as you go along what you'd like to know. We'd really encourage your participation in our training program today as well. We're going to be using a number of different interactive tools as we move through the session, so please do take part in those. It's always really good for us to get your input as we move through. And finally, if you complete our training program, the 2 parts of the training today and on Wednesday, you'll be able to receive a completion certificate. So to get your certificate, you'll need to fill out the feedback survey that we'll share with you at the end of our session on Wednesday. Just to also mention, today's training materials, which include the presentation and our guest speaker presentations as well, and those have hyperlinks in them to all of the resources that we're going to be sharing with you. They're available to download already from the event webpage for today's session. So we'll share that link with you a number of times in the chat to the page. I think it's already in the chat there to everyone. And if you go to the resources section of that page, you'll be able to find our materials. And we'll also add the recording of our training sessions to the same location after the workshops as well. So just to mention who's going to be delivering the training for you. So firstly, I'm Fiona, as I've mentioned, and I'm also joined by my colleague Landon from the SSE Academy team. Thanks, Landon. Alongside us as well, we're very pleased to be joined by a specialist on this topic from UN Women. So Alexandra Carter is the coordinator for the Women's Empowerment Principles Global Secretariat. And Alexandra will be coming to us later in the training to talk a bit about the work that the UN Women team are doing that can support corporates, but particularly the Women's Empowerment Principles. So thanks, Alexandra. And then finally, we have a guest speaker who will also join us in our training today. Denise Cherdak joins us from Bloomberg, and she'll be talking to us about the role that gender data is increasingly playing in how Bloombergs assess and score companies as well. Okay, and so as I've already mentioned, we know that this topic can be quite complex, which is why we've broken our training down into a series of modules that allow us to take a look at this aspect in a structured way. So in our training today, we're going to be covering the first two modules you see there on the top half of the screen, prepare and align. And then in our second training workshop on Wednesday, we're going to go into implement and communication. And so for today in particular, aligned to that prepare and align framing, we've got two key areas that we want to help you to understand. So firstly, why action on gender equality is needed within organizations. And secondly, in particular as well, to think about how to identify the different tools that you can use to help improve gender equality. And that just shows you how we're spending our time together today across our agenda for the training. We'll take a short break in the middle of the session to refresh ourselves. And then if we have some time at the end, we'll wrap up with some resources and answer the rest of your questions. But as I've said, please share your questions in the Q&A and we'll do our best to respond in writing to those as we move through the training as well. To get us started, it's always really helpful for us to get a sense of how much maybe that you already know about gender equality. So we're going to use Menti to help us with this. So Landon's just going to share a link with you to join Menti, and let me change my shared screen as well now to show you the Menti as well. Okay, so let me show you the instructions there. So you can use that code that Landon has shared in the chat with you. Sorry, the link that's available, and that'll take you directly to this first question. You can also go to menti.com and enter the 8-number code you see on the screen there. And finally, you can scan that QR code available as well there. But the first question we have, just to get us started, is to get an understanding of what your current level of comfort is with the different topics that we're aiming to talk about with you today. So firstly, to think about how confident you would be in your own knowledge of this topic, how comfortable you would be discussing it with others, and then in particular as well, how likely you think you would be currently to take action to improve gender equality in your organization. So we'll use Menti a couple of times today for some different exercises. So please do join us in Menti and we'll come back to that. I can see we've got 18 of you who have responded, joined us so far, and 9 responded, but let's see, we have over 40 people in the session. So it'd be great if everyone could take a moment just to join us and let us know your thoughts on this question. So it looks like we're sort of middling to high comfort actually already, which is great to see that we've got lots of people already feeling as though they can discuss this topic and take action, maybe least familiar with that aspect around the connection to financial markets, which of course is going to be something we spend time together on in our training, so no problem at all. But thanks for letting us know that, and we'll come back to see how we're doing at the end of the course once we've obviously covered some of the content. So we'll move now into the first part of our training program together, which is, I'll just show you the modules again. Great. So thanks, everyone. So moving now into prepare, which is our first module of the training, we're going to really be focusing on understanding how gender equality connects to finance and exploring that point in a bit more detail. So in prepare, we've got 3 main sections that we're going to talk about together. So firstly, we'll narrow in on some of the terminology that we need to use to help us to understand how to communicate about gender equality. Then we're going to narrow in further and examine what the case for action is. And then we'll finish off this module by looking at the market trends. And for this unit, we're going to be looking specifically at how markets are doing in terms of gender equality progress as well. But to kick us off, we'll get started with the language. And I think, as we'll all agree, this is an area that can be difficult sometimes, but also important to get right so that we're clear what we're talking about here and using a common understanding of definitions. So to help us with that, we'll go back to Menti and just to get your thoughts really on what gender means to you and what your current understanding is of the term. So I'll switch back to the Menti screen Hopefully you already had that link available, but we'll keep the instructions open so that you can continue to use those as well if you want to join us. The question we have here for you is, what does gender mean for you? So there's no right or wrong answer here. And maybe if you can just think of one or two words that resonate with you, that's no problem at all. But as you can see on the current question, you should be able to enter a couple of words for what you currently think of when you think of gender. So whatever comes to mind for you is great to share. It's just good to get an understanding of how people currently think about this before we start to introduce the sort of official definitions we'll use in today's training. Don't worry as well, your answers are anonymous. So as I said, don't feel too shy about sharing because it doesn't really matter really at this point if we get things wrong or right. It's just about getting your perspective on this topic already. Okay, I'll give it a few more seconds because I see we're being a bit shy today, but it's always nice to know what a few of you think about it. Thanks for those of you who've shared. Great. So I see identity, social participation. Ooh, interesting already. Differences, imbalance, roles, responsibility, rights, physical being. It's fascinating, really. Lots of different ideas around this already, but roles, identity, and rights are coming up as probably the most popular options there. So, really interesting. And I think that's already digging into some very interesting concepts that we're going to start to discuss with you shortly. But thanks for sharing with us. That's always really helpful for us to see what your thoughts are on this topic. Let's just have a quick check. I see women, culture, norms, differences as well, community stereotyping. Okay, really interesting. Thanks, everyone. I think, Landon, that gives you some good starting points to talk about the official definition. So I'll hand over to you for that now.
Great. Thanks, Fiona. And yeah, thank you everyone for some good answers. And it's great to be here with you today. So to make sure we're on the same page and better understand the depth of gender, which is not simply sex or being male or female, the purpose of this initial exercise is to make sure that everyone understands that gender is not the same as sex and that gender can differ across different contexts and different societies with different norms. It's important to note this because it's not really different sexes we always need when we speak about the value of diversity. It's actually different ways of thinking, different lived experiences and life experiences, and different institutional restrictions and freedoms. So while the term gender is quite difficult to define because it means something different to different people, let's briefly get a better idea of what is included in this complex topic. And I know a lot of folks already had some good answers there, but we'll start by using a UN Women definition. And UN Women defines gender as the social attributes and opportunities associated with being male and female, and the relationships between women and men and girls and boys, as well as the relations between women and those between men. These attributes, opportunities, and relationships are socially constructed and learned through socialization processes. They're context and time specific and also malleable or changeable. Gender determines what is expected, allowed, and valued in a woman or a man in a given context and society. And in most societies, there are differences and inequalities between women and men and boys and girls in the responsibilities assigned, activities undertaken, access to and control over resources, as well as often decision-making opportunities. So gender is part of the broader socio-cultural context. And then there's also other important criteria for socio-cultural analysis like class, race, poverty level, ethnic group, and age, among many others that all play a role. So as such, gender is not quite as simple as simply male or female, and gender can be influenced and defined based on the nature of certain relationships, based on hierarchies, the history, the context, the institutions or norms. And most importantly, when we're discussing gender equality today, please remember we're referring to equality of genders, not simply increasing women on boards or another leadership position, although we do, of course, discuss that a fair amount in our session. So feel free to explore this and any other gender equality terms on the Gender Equality Glossary developed by UN Women that is linked to here in this slide. And with that, just a reminder again that the slides are available on the website for the event. So let's dive a bit deeper now. I'm sure many of you have heard of the acronym DEI, which stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. We're increasingly seeing DEI officers or managers in organizations and teams that focus on ensuring an organization's DEI performance. So you might ask, why not just a diversity team or just an inclusion team? So we'll dig a bit deeper to better understand how these connect and interact and the importance of having all three for a full equation. We'll start here with equity, which is ensuring that there's equitable power distribution among people. You can think of equity as providing women and men with the same microphone that amplifies their voices to the same loudness or extent so that everyone can hear them equally, which many of you might be thinking, well, that's the whole objective, isn't it? Well, not quite. It's a part of the bigger picture. Because let's say, for example, that our objective is equity or equal power distribution, but there's no woman in the organization to pick up the microphone and to speak. That means we also have to focus on diversity. Diversity is ensuring representation, so the act of inviting the unrepresented or underrepresented gender to perhaps join the board, and that enhances the diversity of a board. You can think of diversity as having enough seats at the table for diversity to be represented at that table. Again, differences and different levels different lived experiences are important to organizations. So it's not enough to have the microphones at the table, but we also need to make sure that there's enough chairs so that a diverse group of participants are there and willing and able to speak. If you just have those first two, however, you can have cultural assimilation take place, where we expect, for example, women to act just like the men, and then we'll struggle to keep them on the board, and then we won't be benefiting from the diversity that we aim to achieve with this entire initiative. So it's no good to give someone a microphone if they're not willing or able to speak, or alternatively, by claiming that giving someone the power to speak based on their appearances alone is achieving diversity, when the objective of diversity is to include these ways of thinking and diverse lived experiences. This is why we have the last element, which is inclusion. Inclusion refers to the behaviors and the practice of making all members of an organization feel welcomed, giving them equal opportunity to connect, belong, and grow, to contribute to the organization, advance their careers, and feel comfortable and confident being their authentic selves. So to bring it all together, we can say that diversity is being invited to the boardroom, equity is then having the empowerment to speak at the board meeting, and inclusion is being listened to within that board meeting. But of course, this goes much further than just the boardroom, and it should be considered organization-wide. The end goal then is equality, which you see in the middle, which depends on all three of these elements: diversity, equity, and inclusion. We can have diversity without equity or inclusion, and it will not be sustained. And then we can have equity without diversity, and then we won't make substantial progress. So when we talk about equality today and in the next session, especially when we talk about the benefits it brings, remember that we're not simply looking for an equal number of men and women on boards or in organizations. What we really want is these three things together: diversity, equity, and inclusion. So hopefully that helps a bit as an introduction to some key terms. And now we're going to move into our next module on why does gender equality matter. So I'm sure you all already have your own ideas, but we'll get started with more of the human right side of this discussion. It's widely documented that women and girls experience adverse impacts of business activities differently and often disproportionately compared to men and boys. They also face additional barriers to seek access to effective remedies. And moreover, because of multiple forms of discrimination, different women and girls may be affected differently by business activities depending on their age, color, caste, ethnicity, religion, language, literacy, access to economic resources, marital status, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability status. perhaps if they're in a rural versus an urban location, and their migration, indigenous, or minority status. So that's a long list of different aspects that can influence how someone is treated. But what that is all to say is that we know humans are complex beings with many elements that make up their own unique identities. And as such, this is also a complex and interconnected topic. The document you see now on your screen is the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, or the UNGPs, which are considered the global authoritative standards to prevent, mitigate, and remediate business-related adverse human rights impacts. We flagged here on this slide 4 different principles to help us understand some of the obligations that businesses have. The first principle we've highlighted, Principle 14, indicates that the responsibility of business enterprises to respect human rights applies to all enterprises, regardless of their size, sector, operational context, ownership, and structure. So all businesses. The second principle we highlight here is number 16, which encourages businesses to express their commitment to meet their human rights responsibility through a statement of policy. You can often see these on corporate websites, for example. And another principle we wanted to flag is Principle 20, and that highlights that to verify whether adverse human rights impacts are being addressed, businesses should track the effectiveness of their response by using sex disaggregated data. We'll talk a lot about sex disaggregated data and the importance of it in our 2 sessions together, but it's important to enable you to make better decisions internally and identify any issues as they may arise. Finally, Principle 21, the 4th one we've highlighted. This is about the important role of communication, which is also a key element of our second session together. So both the information and the means of communication should be responsive to gender discrimination and the differentiated impacts experienced by women. What's important to consider from a financial perspective is that in addition to being the right thing to do and having a positive impact on society, organizations should be considering the repercussions associated with violating the human rights of employees, partners, and stakeholders. And then policy or legal risk and reputational risks are also important risks to be considered for gender equality and social related disclosures as well. We'll share the link in the chat if you'd like to take a look in any more detail about those principles or the UNGPs. Now, this slide here, you see the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals. We know that sustainable development depends on equality of gender. So as you may know, or many of you likely know, these UN SDGs, they have their own SDG on gender equality, SDG 5, and the SDGs represent an ambitious end to attempt to end poverty, protect the planet, and improve the lives and well-being of all of humanity. I want to note that gender equality does have its own SDG. You see here the little red box, but gender equality appears across all of the SDGs. And when you look at the indicators or the metrics and targets of all the SDGs, you also see gender equality in the indicators and targets of 10 out of the 17 SDGs specifically. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about gender equality and the Sustainable Development Goals, you can look at the SSE guidance on gender equality for stock exchanges. So you may ask, what exactly does improving gender equality do for society? And there's a lot of different angles and elements to this. Studies have shown that when we have more equality of genders in society, we also see lower levels of violence, greater economic productivity, and we actually also see greater resilience against financial and environmental crises. I want to remind you that by gender equality, we don't want to imply more women than men, but equality means that both women and men are represented, have the same level of power, and are both heard and understood equally. But to achieve equality, in many cases, we do need to provide some extra support to the underrepresented group, which in many cases today is women. To give you an example of this economic impact that gender equality has on society, a study by the World Bank estimated that the loss in human capital wealth due to gender inequality is over 160 trillion. And another study concluded that equal participation of men and women entrepreneurs could boost global GDP by 3 to 6%, which is just a huge number. And the links, as always, are included in the slide handout. So promoting gender equality of genders, promoting gender equality has been found to provide positive social, environmental, economic, and business benefits. And I just want to take a moment to narrow in a bit deeper into a few of these different benefits. So we see that companies with higher levels of diversity, both gender and ethnic, at the executive level are found to show higher performance than their less diverse counterparts on both profitability and long-term value creation measures. We also see different genders having different attitudes towards risk. So if our decision makers, like the board and leadership team, are gender diverse across an organization, that can lead to more balanced decision-making processes. And with that, different genders experience the world differently and therefore have different views and ideas that they can bring to the table. There's also evidence that companies with workplace policies that support and promote gender equality are better able to attract and retain talent, which I think is more and more important as the workplace and private enterprise becomes even more competitive. And according to data from Parallel Finance, investor demand for gender lens investing has continued to grow in recent years, with assets under management for gender lens equity funds reaching 4.5 billion by the end of 2024. So we see increasingly companies with strong approaches to gender equality have access to dedicated funding, which recognizes that progress. Companies with more diverse boards and senior management teams demonstrate better environmental ESG performance, including having more ethical business practices, enhanced workplace and work. So we see companies with more diverse boards and senior management teams. We see evidence that they demonstrate better ESG performance with more ethical business practices, enhanced workplace and workforce policies, and stronger community relations. We're going to do a little deep dive on one of the many studies on this topic to see a bit more detail about the benefits that these diverse companies are seeing. This data comes from a study by FP Analytics, the Independent Research and Advisory Division of Foreign Policy. This study looked particularly at industries that are traditionally male-dominated, analyzing over 2,300 publicly listed companies, and they did more than 160 in-depth interviews. The study found that companies with more women on the board have on average a higher profit, greater transparency, and higher social ratings. So we'll quickly look at those three elements. First, on profitability, the study found that the companies with the highest percentage of women in management were on average 47% more profitable than those with the lowest or the least amount of women in management. Those findings are consistent with other evidence that promoting gender equality and diversity can benefit a business's bottom line. And in a study by the International Labor Organization, women interviewed for that study detailed how they're leading their organizations on new revenue-generating paths, advancing innovation in inertia-prone industries, advocating for harm-reducing practices, and increasing transparency to build stakeholder trust. That leads us to our second element on transparency. So building trust across stakeholder groups, including employees, consumers, regulators, and investors, is vital for legacy industries that are working to evolve their business models, improve regulatory compliance and performance, and respond to consumers' always changing needs. The study found that the companies with the highest percentage of women on boards are more transparent in terms of ESG information disclosure. In particular, the companies with at least one woman on the board are 17% more transparent than those with no woman board members. So we see here the step that Egypt has taken with having at least one woman on the board as a requirement, is very much a step in the right direction, according to this study. And lastly, on social ratings and corporate social responsibility, the analysis found a positive correlation between gender diversity on corporate boards and companies' social responsibility performance. Women interviewed for that study provided numerous firsthand accounts of their efforts to protect safety and labor rights, integrate community development into business strategy, as well as building local capacity and empowering women in the community, not just in their own company. Remember also, we discussed just a few slides ago that diversity and equality can have important societal and environmental impacts. So another interesting element of this same study was that equality not only had an impact within the company, but also for the environment where it operates. So more diverse boards were 39% more likely to reduce their emissions. They were 46% more water efficient and 60% more energy efficient than their peers who had less gender diverse boards. And in your handout, you can find a few more slides about this if you want to dive deeper into that subject. And we'll also share in the chat, as I see Fiona just did, there's the publication from IFC on gender responsive climate governance and the role of women leaders. With that, I'll turn it back over to Fiona.
Great, thanks for that, Landon. So now that we've really looked there at the case for gender equality, we're going to round off this first module by having a look at the current state of the market. So to get us started on that before we show you some of the data, we're going to head back to Menti again now to get your thoughts on how far you think we might have to go at the moment based on our current rate of progress. So let me just switch to show you the Menti again. I've just shared the link again in the chat there with you. That was the same as before. But you can see the question here, which is to ask you, on our current trajectory, how many years do you think it's going to take for the world to achieve gender equality? So you can move that sliding scale there to make a guess as to when you think we'll reach gender equality globally. You can answer anywhere between 10 and 500 years. In increments of 10 years. So I'll give you a few seconds all to have a think and let us know your thoughts on that. Just take a guess if you're not sure. It's always interesting just to see what people think before we show you the data on this. So I see we've had about 10 people respond so far. And I think it looks like 200 years is the most popular answer, but a fairly even spread of different options between maybe 100 and 150 years. Someone went a little bit over 300, so a little bit of a mix of maybe degrees of optimism about how far you think we have to go. So I'll show you the answer now. And the answer is coming from a report that the UN Women produced with research on this topic. And it showed that it would be almost 300 years, so 285 years before we achieve gender equality. I will note that this measurement can differ based on how we measure equality. So, for example, the World Economic Forum also conducts something called the Global Gender Gap Report, and they are a little bit more optimistic of maybe 130 years. But overall, of course, it's quite a big number, and it's clear that at this rate of progress, we're not going to see equality of people based on their gender within our lifetime. So a little bit stark, I think, but interesting to really understand the position there. Okay, so our second thing is now focusing a little bit more on the corporate perspective, is to, oh, I don't know how we have a line drawn on the graph there. With someone doodling, I'm not sure, but not to worry. I don't seem to be able to get rid of that. But never mind. So you can vote again using the same kind of scale, but between 0 and 100% now, to take a guess at the percentage of CEOs of listed companies in your market that you think might be women. So we're going to go into the data. And we've included Egypt in our research here, so the largest listed companies on the exchange. What do you think the total kind of average figure is here for percentage of women? So at the SSE, we've conducted research on this topic across markets. I'm going to have a little bit of a look at that overall. I mean, one thing we've seen mentioned before in the US, there's been some famous studies looking at this, and apparently on the S&P 500, for each firm that has a female CEO, there are as many firms that have men named. There are more firms with men named John than there are have female CEOs. So obviously, a long way to go in America. But how do you think that compares to your market? So I think we see a bit of a range of the ones you've guessed so far, maybe between 0 and 10% being the most popular. Um, and indeed, it's quite low. So it's just 2% of women CEOs at the moment. So uh, most of you are a little bit more optimistic than that, but obviously shows a lot of work to do in that regard. And then the second statistic is asking the same question, but for the number of board seats in your region. So, do you think that might be higher or lower? We just heard 2% of CEOs are women. Take a guess at what you think it could be for board seats, and then we'll hand over to have a look at the data itself in a second. Okay, so I think maybe with that knowledge of what the number is for CEOs, we're now guessing a little bit on the lower side for the board seats again. But some people still thinking it could be a bit higher as well. I see we've got 40 and 60, but perhaps most people looking at around 5% perhaps. So we'll look at the answer now, which is 17%. So it actually is higher than the number of women CEOs. So perhaps obviously there's more seats on a board, so it is more easy to support female or women's representation in that sense there. But obviously still a long way from 50% at the same time. So let's have a little bit of a look now at the data and how that might compare to the global picture. So I'll hand you over to Landon, who's going to take you through that.
Great. Thank you. And yeah, exactly. To run through a bit more of the data on that, it goes back to the publications that Fiona mentioned. So the SSE, in collaboration with IFC, UN Women, and other partners, have worked together to provide market monitors, and this provides markets with an overview of current benchmarks on progress on gender in the leadership of listed companies. And we'll dive a bit more into one of these reports that also, the next report will also include Egypt. So you can see the first section, which covers the G20. We'll also share the link in this for this publication in the chat so you can read it on your own time. And then all these reports can, of course, be found on our publication page. Again, this data can serve as a benchmark for exchanges and other relevant institutions in their efforts to promote gender diversity and women's full and effective participation in and equal opportunities for corporate leadership positions. The first table we see here on the screen shows that the average percent of board seats held by women in the G20 is about 25% as of 2025. So that's a report we just released recently, about 1 month ago. And there's an overall positive trend line. There's only a few markets decreasing from the previous year. And in case you can't quite see it on your screen, the top 5 exchanges are located in France, the UK, Italy, Australia, and the USA. It's also worth noting that France leads the leaderboard for the G20. They also have a regulatory requirement for the number or the percentage of women on their boards, and that is 40%. So even though that percent of women on boards is among the highest in the world, their women's executive pipeline was not as strong, hence the regulation. So in May 2021, the French Parliament introduced gender quotas for executive leadership. They set 30% for 2027, which of course they've already exceeded since they're at 45%, and 40% for 2030, which they've also already reached and exceeded that target. We see many countries improving slightly each year. You do see a few sliding backwards, and then some with a longer distance to travel. For example, some data from this report shows only 6 markets in the G20 have no all-male boards among their top 100 issuers, which is LSEG, Australia, Canada with TSX, South Africa, Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and NASDAQ, and JPX in Japan. And then in 7 markets in the G20, more than 20% of the top 100 issuers have only men on the boards. I want to take a moment to look at some regional data here, though. So here you can see only two regions have on average over 30%. That's Europe and CanZ. CanZ is United States, Canada, and New Zealand and Australia. And that's significant because it's been highly researched that at least 30% representation is required for fair power distribution and for that less represented group for their voices to be heard in decision making. We see Europe leading with about 38% of board seats held by women. That's, of course, bolstered by France with their 45% of board seats in listed companies. And then US CanZ isn't too far behind with 34%. Africa region averages 25%, but within this regional grouping, we have a great degree of variance. So you have South Africa with Johannesburg Stock Exchange at 33% in board seats, and then we have Egypt at 17%. So there's about a 16-point difference there. Then we see Southeastern Asia in fourth place with 22%, then Eastern Asia at 17, Latin America with 16, and Western Asia with just 9%. And in your slide handout, you'll find some additional data here looking at the regional picture a bit further. We'll take a moment to run through Africa, but if you do want more time, you can do so as well. So right now in Africa, excuse me, you can see, of course, JSE is in first place here, and then that's followed by Botswana, Ghana, and Nairobi. And then the group average is 25% board seats held by women. You also see a fair amount of men on boards, only men on boards showing up here, but relatively lower amounts. Here you see a bit more only men on the boards, and then you see Nigeria with 25%, Zimbabwe, Morocco, Mauritius, Tanzania, and Egypt here with 17% again. We also see a lot of good progress being made. For example, EGX has increased by 5%, or I should say 5 points, since the change in 2023 when we last did this analysis for EGX in our study. So that is good progress, but of course, some more to be done, of course. So with that, it begs the question, what are some of the barriers facing your organization or your country and market to advance gender equality in corporate leadership? I'd love to hear some answers from you all. It can even just be a few words or even one word if you have an idea of what is a barrier for gender equality in corporate leadership in Egypt, Africa, or the region. Nada notes culture and patriarchal norms. Yep, that's a good answer. Culture always comes up a lot when we ask this question, which makes sense because culture, as we've discussed with gender equality and gender, is such a key element. More culture coming through. Dahlia notes opportunity. That's a good answer as well. Walla notes no proper childcare mechanism. That's really interesting. That's something that will come up a bit throughout our two sessions together. Different workforce policies such as childcare, discrimination, bias. Okay, more social norms, male bias, stereotypes. Okay, great. Yeah, no, please keep having a think about it, but these are some great answers. So I want to take a moment to go through some additional key barriers that maybe we didn't mention in the chat yet. So we know in addition to the structural obstacles faced by women in the general workforce, such as unequal regulatory environments, lack of workplace flexibility, conflicts between work and family obligations, there's also specific barriers that can narrow women's leadership paths and cause the drop in representation that you often see at the top of organizations that we highlighted with far fewer women CEOs and board members. This is where we start to dive even deeper into the complexity of this topic. So I do recommend reviewing these on your own time as well. And I want to just take a moment to mention a few that we didn't get into in the chat. One I know I've mentioned today is limited availability of sex disaggregated data and inconsistent reporting practices, which can make it difficult to measure progress or understand the extent of a gender gap. In turn, that creates challenges in identifying effective interventions to close the gap. So you need to kind of measure to be able to manage. I think this was noted in the chat by someone, lack of training and professional development opportunities. We also see lack of gender-sensitive human capital management. That can be in hiring, retention processes, promotion processes. So you could use, so some companies use non-diverse hiring committees and limited use of gender-blind applications, which can lead to decisions based on biases, which I think Dahlia noted, biases. And then that's decision-making on biases rather than on merit or qualifications. Again, biases and stereotypes that suggest women don't have the characteristics needed to lead. That was mentioned a number of times. There's also still, even though we've presented a lot of evidence on this, there's a lack of awareness or still skepticism about the business case for gender balanced leadership, which means initiatives to advance and promote gender equality may not be a top strategic priority for companies. And that's where I'd say to all the men on the call as allies, men in leadership who have embraced the values of diversity and inclusion, you have a role to play to help elevate the importance of such initiatives and drive action. We also see, I believe, again, someone noted this, the lack of access to perhaps networks, connections, maybe mentors, things like this, which can also decrease the visibility and make it harder for those women to move up that ladder. We also see unsuitable work environments in traditionally male-dominated industries, for example, not having women's locker rooms or changing for uniforms, which of course that makes it quite uncomfortable or even unsafe for women. And then that naturally leads into safety concerns in operational locations and the risk of gender-based violence and harassment, which obviously represent serious deterrents to women's professional advancement in the workplace. And these, as we call it, GBVH, or gender-based violence and harassment in the workplace, and domestic and silent sexual violence experience beyond the workplace can also affect employees' well-being and the business operations. Those experiences can lead to reduced productivity, increased absenteeism, and higher employee turnover. And it can also deter women from chasing promotions and career development opportunities that are stepping stones to reach those senior leadership roles. With that, it's important to note that achieving a truly gender diverse senior leadership team and optimizing the true value in diversity is about more than just sheer numbers and gaining parity in representation. The key is ensuring that men and women have equal voice and agency once they're in their leadership roles so that they all can contribute to determining their organization's path. And to increase the number of women leaders and prepare them to take on leadership roles, companies must also truly invest in women. That means attending to the culture and purpose of their organizations, and it means adopting a more people-focused business model as part of an approach that integrates an ESG orientation into all aspects of a business's operations. If you do want to dive deeper into another topic, which is lack of progress on gender responsive climate action, I recommend checking out a recent publication from the IFC on gender responsive climate governance. The report looks at why we're seeing the levels of progress on gender equality we want to see in the context of climate action. In other words, what barriers are getting in the way, which speaks to a lot of the points we just discussed now. Some examples of what the report finds are a lack of knowledge or training on the topic, also a low level of climate and gender literacy. Well, oh, thanks, Fiona. I see Fiona shared the link in the chat. Now, with that, I know this is a lot of information to digest and process, so we're going to take a quick, brief pause for you to grab a tea or a coffee and take a quick stretch. Feel free to ask any questions you might have in the Q&A. Just a quick reminder, there is the Q&A function there for you, so please take use of it, and we'll reconvene in just 5 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully, you had a quick chance to grab a tea or stretch. And now that we have some of these initial concepts clear, we're going to dive more into additional content and start with how we can enhance an organization's performance on gender equality. The objective of our next unit, Align, is to ensure that your practices align with the global best practices and standards, as well as any local or peer practices that should guide your efforts. We'll begin by looking at the global principles that companies can use to enhance their practices on this topic. And the global standards we're going to be discussing today are the UN Women's Empowerment Principles, or the WEPs. And with that, we're just going to launch a poll. Should be up now. Is your organization a signatory of the UN Women's Empowerment Principles, or the WEPs? Yes, no, or maybe you don't know, or you're just not sure right now. If your organization's not yet a signatory, we're also going to give you some information shortly about how to become one at the end of the section. Okay, I'd love to get a few more answers here. Okay, so I'll end the poll there. And we see a lot of folks that don't know currently. So with that, I encourage you, if you're not sure, to try to find out. You can check the WEP's website, or you can talk to someone in your organization if you're a signatory or not. Sorry, a little tech issue there. But with that, to talk to us more today about the UN WEPs, we have an expert joining us from UN Women. And as was introduced at the beginning, Alex is joining from UN Women to help provide an overview of the WEPs and answer any of your questions about the principles. Before Alex gets started, we're going to play a quick video to help introduce the WEPs a bit more. So what exactly are they?
Think about the impact of a signature. Think about the magnitude of a global movement. Think about the difference you can make and the power of transformative change. By signing the Women's Empowerment Principles, you can galvanize your shareholders and stakeholders to drive change in the workplace, marketplace, and community through a framework of 7 principles. Brought to you by UN Women and UN Global Compact, the Women's Empowerment Principles are a roadmap for business sustainability, innovation, and productivity. Businesses by the thousands and in every sector are becoming part of this world-changing movement to advance gender equality. Businesses that become models for attracting talent, entering new markets, serving their communities, and measurably improving the bottom line. Because gender equality means better business. Don't miss this moment to make a lasting impact on your employees, suppliers, customers, and investors. Join leading companies already on the journey to greater sustainability and growth. Commit to the Women's Empowerment Principles and make today your organization's signature moment.
Okay, great. With that, the floor is yours, Alex.
Thank you very much, Landon, good day, good afternoon to everybody. I'm happy to see that we have some WEPs signatories in the room as well as non-signatories, and I really hope that you can use this time together to either refresh a bit your memory on the WEPs or learn about the Women's Empowerment Principles. As you can see, we are currently at a global footprint of over 12,000 companies that have signed this commitment to gender equality from around 193 countries globally. I am delighted to be part of this training to go over the Women's Empowerment Principles, or in short, WEPs, with you. Because as we've seen from the previous presentations, with the rising importance of, for example, ESG requirements and reporting, but also consumer and investor interest in companies being able to prove their commitment to gender equality, as well as the economic potential that we've seen from London. Many companies are realizing the importance of integrating gender equality in their business model, but they are unclear on how to go about it. So the WEPs are trying to respond to that difficulty of how to go about it by providing a holistic framework for companies. And we focus on 5 pillars. So we focus on leadership and governance, workplace, marketplace, community, as well as reporting and communication. And with this, the WEPs really make an effort to have a comprehensive suite of tools and guidance on how companies can integrate gender equality across the entire business model. And this is also what we proudly say makes the WEPs unique. It is the only framework that covers the entire business model. So companies are currently using the WEPs as a blueprint to position gender equality as a core part of their business strategy, as well as through their operations and beyond. But it's also a community of practice. So we make a huge effort to connect companies so that you can learn from each other, and to exchange on best practices, on difficulties, on challenges, etc. So there's a lot of resources available both online on the website, weps.org, but then also through webinars and also locally where we connect with stock exchanges. I believe there was a recent WEPs training happening at the Egyptian Stock Exchange, as well as through country level programs. I will briefly go over the 7 principles, which you can see here on the right side of the screen. I do want to note first that the principles are not organized in sequence of importance, and companies tend to tackle the principles that are most urgent for them first. So it doesn't mean you have to start with number 1, 2, or 3, but you can choose the sequence. The first principle is on governance, strategy, and gender responsive leadership. And while I say you don't have to start at number 1, it is best, or we recommend that this builds a foundation for the WEPs work of really having the CEO and the leadership, the management team buy in to gender equality and promote gender equality from the executive team to make it as a whole of organization priority. So we're not only looking at appointment of women in senior leadership here, but also that the executive team and board commit to the WEPs. They develop and approve an action plan and dedicate resources to integrating gender equality across the business model. Principles 2, 3, and 4 all focus on the workplace pillar, from respecting human rights and treating everybody fairly, to adopting or amending policies to remove discriminatory, biased, and stereotypical practices, equal work for equal value, as well as prevention and response to sexual harassment in the workplace as well as beyond. And of course, providing equal training, promotion, and advancement opportunities to men and women. The 5th principle focuses on the marketplace pillar. So this is where we're going beyond looking internally, but really about how you can impact and shape your sector and your communities. So companies have a huge influence in the marketplace by either investing in women-owned businesses, procuring from companies that are owned by women or that have strong gender responsive policies and have similar cultural values as pertains to gender equality, as well as creating gender responsive marketing practices and much more, or even gender responsive products. So this really looks at how you interact in the marketplace. Principle 6 looks at the role of companies in the community. We say that companies are not independent of communities. You operate within communities. Your staff is part of the community as well as your company has an impact on it. So we encourage and guide companies on developing initiatives and advocacy that make a real difference in women and girls' lives. And we also invite companies to actively consult and engage and work with women and girls, as well as women and girls organizations in local communities, before rolling out initiatives. And lastly, principle 7 is an underpinning principle to measure results. What gets measured gets done, and it's also what you can communicate. So it's how you can communicate progress. Companies are encouraged to regularly collect data to understand their progress over time, and also to report on what they're doing. We have a function on webs.org, but as we see before, there's also increasing reporting requirements across the world, from stock exchanges, for markets, etc. And we do also encourage, as a first step, for example, to see whether you mention any type of gender equality indicators in your sustainability or company reports or annual reports. So these are some of the entry points and some of the actions that companies can take. When we're talking about becoming a WEPS signatory and tackling or advancing gender equality within your company, we talk about a journey. So it's not something that happens once by signing on to the WEPS, but that is really the first step. That is the commitment. And then companies need to work on engaging internal and external stakeholders to make ongoing and meaningful progress. When doing so, we encourage companies to tackle both deeply rooted and systemic inequalities, but also going for some of the activities that are more easily implemented with certain activities, such as changing recruitment practices. But it's really important that this also be anchored in policies, practices, and long-term change. So when we talk about, let me talk a bit about the journey, starting on the left top with activate. Activation is really the start where your commitment becomes action. It often begins with an honest reflection and an understanding of your strengths, identifying areas for growth and addressing gaps. And for this, we have a self-assessment tool, which is the gender gap analysis tool, which helps you really through 18 questions go through your whole business and identify where you're strong, and identify areas that might be urgent to be addressed so that you comply with legal requirements, but also so that you can capture the full benefits of gender equality. So this is where you lay the groundwork for lasting impact on gender equality and you develop your plans. Engagement is about broadening your impact. As part of the WEPS community, you have the opportunity to involve your employees, your business partners, your clients and customers in building a gender inclusive ecosystem and value chain. So this is really about fostering dialogue and collaboration to extend the reach of your commitment beyond your own company. Sustaining, of course, means keeping up the momentum. We see a lot of companies are very excited when they join and commit to the WEPS, and then everyday activities do take over. There's opportunities, there's crises, etc. So sustaining really means ensuring accountability, regularly revising and taking up your action plans, tracking and analyzing your results by collecting the data, and communicating the progress both internally and externally. And that's the last part in the cyclical journey, which is really transparency and accountability as a key driver to sustaining progress. And also by reporting your results and sharing challenges and successes, your company demonstrates impacts, but also strengthens trust. So this is really a way of leading by example, scaling your efforts and inspiring your peers across the industry to take action. And we call it the WEPS journey because it continues. There's always something new that can be improved or that can be tackled, and we can always grow and learn together. So that a lot of companies go through multiple cycles of action plans, always sort of setting their goals higher at each different one. So this might seem complicated, but we offer over 200 tools and resources to guide companies on how to work on the WEPS. So please do not be intimidated by this. We do encourage you to go to webs.org/join and consider joining the Women's Empowerment Principles. It is easy and straightforward to join. and then the journey begins. So with this, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. And I will hand over to Landon again. If you have any questions on the WEPs, please feel free to put them in the chat or reach out.
Great. Thanks so much again, Alex. It's a great introduction, and we recommend, again, for those looking to take a first step on this topic, that you start by working with your leadership to become signatories of the WEPs. And as Alex noted, any questions about the WEPs, etc., please do use the Q&A function. And for those of you that may be joining from companies that are already WEPs signatories, I think there's more and more every time I check the website. We wanted to flag also what you can consider doing next. This slide here highlights one of the options available, which is taking your commitment that additional step further by having your gender equality practices certified. EDGE certification provides a certifying service that can help you to take your practices that step further, and also provides a communication tool to show the market that you're a leading company on gender equality. In our next session together, we'll have a member of the EDGE team joining us as a guest speaker, so you'll hear more about this then. With that, I'll turn it over to Fiona.
Great, thank you, Landon. So now that we've looked there at a few different global initiatives, we're going to move on to consider what you should do based on your particular location. And we know that one of the key factors that should be considered based on where your company is listed, as well as where its main operations are, is regulation. So let's discuss what we're seeing from a regulatory perspective. So one question we often get asked about is whether or not quotas or mandatory requirements work, and if this is something that should be implemented in a country. So on this slide, we can see an overview of markets where there's some kind of rule governing women's representation on corporate boards, which comes from a recent publication that we released at the SSE, and thanks, Landon, for sharing that in the chat. So this research reviewed 193 UN member states and identified three broad categories of different types of rules. So firstly, mandatory minimum rules, mandatory disclosures, and also voluntary targets as well. And mandatory minimum rules were identified in 25 markets, mandatory disclosure requirements in 24, and voluntary frameworks in 16. And so the research identified significant variation in the design and application of board diversity rules across jurisdictions. So rules differ in their legal basis, ranging from legislation to stock exchange rules or non-binding guidelines, as well as in their structure, scope, and enforcement mechanisms as well. And so whilst board diversity rules can play an important role in increasing women's representation, the experience we're seeing across markets demonstrates that mandatory minimum rules don't automatically guarantee success because weak enforcement, inconsistent application, or perhaps limited compliance can significantly reduce their impact. And so if you'd like to dig into this topic a bit deeper, you'll review in the slides a few extra slides in the handout here that we've included, which give you some insights from some further studies about this, including one from the UN Principles for Responsible Investment on gender-based quota policies. So as we've seen in the data that we discussed already today, sometimes these types of rules work and sometimes they don't. So why is that? Well, it's not the entire reason, but a part of this is because it does really depend on how the company itself implements such a quota. So what actions are taken by the company and how such a rule or regulation might therefore be interpreted within the organization. So to help bring this to life, we're going to come down to the company level now and look at what this might mean through an exercise. So to do this exercise, we're going to discuss two hypothetical companies. We'll call one of them Owl Inc. and the other one Peacock PLC. So these are made-up companies, but the discussion we'll have about them on their decision-making processes is based on research into real companies as well. So please keep that in mind. So both of these companies, we're going to say, have around 10% women on their boards and in executive leadership currently, but that they actually have much closer to parity or an equal gender split at lower level operational positions in the organization. So it's already clear that women aren't necessarily getting into the higher level positions, and there must be some issues driving that. And there's also one other thing that they have in common. They both have just had a change in leadership and have had new CEOs join the organization. And so let's say that both CEOs are expecting new regulation to come in. So they're preparing for a mandatory rule relating to gender equality. And the new CEOs in both companies are passionate about gender equality. And as well as meeting that regulatory requirement, they do want to achieve gender equality at the top of their companies in board and leadership positions, so that they can also be included in a gender equality index, which will give them exposure to investors that value gender equality. However, each company took quite a different approach towards their goals of gender equality and therefore had different results. So we're going to talk a little bit now about the two approaches that they've taken and examine which measures we think will be most effective. So firstly, we'll start with Peacock PLC. So their CEO decided to set a bold target of increasing leadership representation to 40% of women in 2 years' time. And so that's coming from only 10% currently, so a big and quite ambitious change. And to help reach this 40%, the CEO makes a big announcement to staff about this. And also, as she is a woman in a leadership position, she shares her personal experience of climbing the ladder and uses this example to encourage other women to follow her to the top too. They also set a hiring freeze in the organization for any men until that target is reached, unless a male candidate is approved by her for some sort of extenuating circumstances. So some employees are probably feeling maybe excited and empowered about this change, but there's going to be a mixed reaction because there are likely to be some women who feel now more pressure to move up or out of the organization. And also, of course, some men may have job security concerns after this announcement as well. So the overall sentiment that we might see here will be a mix of possibly excitement and fear. So as I've said, Owl Inc. go about this a little bit differently. So let's hear about the actions that Owl Inc. take. So Owl Inc. also has that new CEO who's committed to gender equality. But instead of setting that 40% target and having a hiring freeze, the CEO decides to join an initiative called the 30% Club. And so if you're not familiar with this, the 30% Club is an organization that calls on its members to try to achieve at least 30% women's representation on their boards and in executive leadership, because this is seen as the critical mass at which minority voices become heard. And they overall want to try and achieve more than this number, but they decide that joining that initiative and aiming for 30% is a good starting point. But the CEO also knows that they're not really sure what the root causes are that are causing women to not be able to move up the organization into leadership roles. And so this is why she also decides to set up an internal task force to find out maybe what the root causes are that might be preventing women from progressing their careers. And at the same time, the CEO initiates a reverse mentoring program. So this is a scheme whereby senior leaders are mentored by more junior colleagues within the business. And so we already know that 50% of the workforce is women. So why is it that their leadership aren't learning from them and hearing their experiences already? So hopefully this program will allow leaders to benefit from more diverse perspectives at an operational level, and also provide interested staff with exposure to senior leadership to help them progress their careers as well. Okay, so we've heard a bit there about some different approaches that those organisations have taken. And now we'd like to have a little think together about which of those approaches we think are likely to be most effective. So we'll go back to Menti now to give this a go. So what we're going to do is we've got sort of 6 of the key measures that we heard about there from Owl Inc. and Peacock PLC. And you probably have some thoughts already on which of those to you sound like things that will be most effective, and maybe things that maybe wouldn't be as constructive or productive in taking forward gender equality progress. So we'd like to get your thoughts really on how you'd rank those different activities. So you can choose from 1 to 6 to rank the most effective thing at number 1, and which you think would be the least effective thing at number 6. So we've got a mix there of the different actions, and we heard about some of them from OWLINK and some of them from Peacock PLC. So we'll give you all a few more seconds to have a think. I think we've only had 3 people vote so far, so it would be really nice to see a few more responses than that. So I'm going to give you all a few more seconds since we've got a little bit of time here to have a vote, because it's always useful for us to get a sense of what you think as well before I tell you what I think. So okay, maybe I'll give it a couple more seconds and then we'll have a little bit of a talk about that. But it looks as though, definitely from those of you who did take part, we had creating that gender equality task force coming out as the top idea. Indeed, I think that is likely to be a really good starting point because, of course, if we don't know what the real root causes are that are preventing women from being promoted, we may not put in place the right measures to address that. So I think that is something we definitely agree with there. And of course, as you say as well, number 2, sharing examples and role models can be quite positive to showcase others' experiences and bring forward those examples. And I think it's interesting here as well that that's been ranked more highly than the reverse mentoring program, because actually, although I think both of those initiatives have similar aims in a way to connect leaders with employees and show those experiences and routes forward, actually, the great thing about a reverse mentoring scheme is that it's really a two-way communication. So whilst sharing that role models from the top down can be useful, of course, it's a one-way communication out to the workforce and isn't necessarily allowing the leaders to really hear what employees think in practice. So that's where I think maybe a reverse mentoring program by comparison could offer some advantages. And it looks like the hiring freeze has been ranked as the least effective measure. Again, I think we probably agree with you there because although, of course, it's likely to drive quite rapid results in terms of the pure numbers of women represented, it possibly isn't going to be a very sustainable long-term approach because it's likely to negatively affect the culture of the organization, and it might cause some other potential issues as well, which we'll hear about in a moment. So thanks everyone for sharing the thoughts on that. It's good to get your sense, and I think it looks quite aligned with what we'll see now when we go back to the 2 companies. So let's have a quick look at those again, and we'll see how we think that could have played out for the 2 companies. So let's start with Peacock PLC. So if you remember, this was the organization that set the hiring freeze and had the ambitious 40% target. So setting that quota, of course, is likely to drive immediate progress. But the issue for Peacock PLC is likely to be that they didn't really identify the root causes that were underlying the problems here. And they also probably demotivated a lot of men in the organization through those actions. So without taking a look at the root causes, they missed a few key barriers that were preventing progress. So, for example, they had some issues in terms of their work culture, their benefit programs, some pay gaps and unconscious biases that weren't properly identified. And so what this meant is that filling those vacancies for the organization took longer, and sometimes they weren't necessarily getting the right candidate for the position. And what that really led to was culture change in a negative sense, higher turnover. And although really there were some good intentions here, because they didn't get to those root causes, we don't think that it's likely that they would have sustainably addressed gender inequality issues. And so if we contrast that with OWLINK, you might guess that by the looks of it, we're expecting that this would work out a little bit better. So the approach that we think is important here is that OWLINK took the time to really understand and get to the root cause. So while that's important to acknowledge, that probably will then take them more resources and investment up front, we do think that there's likely to be a good return on investment from taking that action. Because through that more holistic approach, Owl Inc. were able to realize that they needed to change some of the benefit and working culture practices in their organization to allow women to have the space and energy to kind of progress their careers alongside other life commitments. And so that task force and the reverse mentoring program really gave them the innovation and insights to put in place the right ideas and different approaches that would help to drive progress. And so as a result of this, the company was likely to have better retention than Peacock PLC, which then meant it was having to spend less resource on external recruitment and could redirect more HR resource towards training and support programs to enhance the culture for the organization and advance women's career programs as well. So I think what we've hopefully shown there is that whilst a regulatory quota can be a useful tool to potentially drive change in a market, of course, it's only so effective as how it's implemented. And that's where corporate culture is really critical here. And the particular actions that individual companies take are so important. And so we don't have time to talk through this slide in a lot of detail, but I just want to highlight to you this slide, which summarizes some of the key areas that organizations might wish to consider to use as a bit of a list to help them identify those root causes and avoid making that same mistake that Peacock PLC did. Okay. So that's bringing us up to the close of this section. But before we finish it off, we're just going to launch one final poll for you now, which is asking, okay, so we've talked there about lots of measures that companies could take. And what do you think really are the measures here that will support companies to improve its financial performance? So is it implementing policies that promote gender diversity, creating all women boards, collecting gender disaggregated data, maybe only promoting women until you reach parity? Or is it setting gender-based targets? So you can select more than one option here if you think there's more than one right answer. But we'll give a few more seconds. Let us know what you think here before we take a look at those results. Okay. Try and get a few more of you to participate, so I'll give that a few more seconds so that you can have a think. As I said, don't worry about getting things wrong, but it's nice to get your thoughts and reflections as we move through this training together as well. Okay, let's close the poll there and we'll have a look at the results. So most of you who voted here went for options 1, 3, and 5. Indeed, that's correct. Those are the correct answers here. However, I think what's really important to emphasize is that having all 3 of these actions together and not just one of them is key. So, for example, if we just set gender-based targets, but we didn't put in place the policies to enable that women are supported to stay in leadership roles, and we didn't collect the data to help us to understand the root causes of the issue and how progress was moving forward, then we're likely going to struggle to really achieve our goal of gender equality. And so those 3 actions are really key, but bringing them forward together is what's important as well. Great. Okay, so that brings us up to the end of that segment. And now we're going to move on to look at a few particular peer practices and approaches in different industries. And so to talk us through that, I'm going to hand back to Alex from the UN Women team. So over to you, Alex.
Thank you very much, Fiona. And so I'll just be presenting some examples of implementing the Women's Empowerment Principles by signatories. So I would like to start with the workplace, where one of our signatories, a leading bank in Sweden, tackled the gender pay gap across its 16,000 employees. To ensure fairness, the bank introduced a job evaluation system that is regularly updated and compares roles across the organization to be able to identify the value of the work. And this approach allowed them to measure and monitor pay equity effectively. The bank's initiative is backed by close monitoring and regular reporting, which has strengthened transparency and accountability. So again, that importance of having systems in place and having data that help you track progress and track systems to avoid any type of unconscious or unintended biases. The next example is one of the favorite ones, as it gives a lesson learned to always consult with stakeholders and keep to your different cultural contexts. So a textile manufacturer in Pakistan invested a large amount of money to provide an on-site childcare facility for their workers to use. And they did this because a majority of their workers are women with young children requiring childcare. So they thought, well, this is one way that we can make their life a bit easier and also keep them in the workforce when they become mothers. Yet they found out that almost nobody was using the facility, so they'd invested a lot of money, nobody was using it. Only then did they consult their employees and found out that the standard norm was that the children were staying at home and the grandparents were taking care of the children. So in order to then properly and adequately support their staff, the company changed its approach and offered childcare subsidies that were more welcomed and more used by the employees and were just as cost efficient for the business itself. So when we look at the marketplace, I just wanted to highlight the two examples. Sorry, going back one slide. There we go. So a financial platform in the US had a goal to boost the amount of lending to women entrepreneurs, especially from small businesses, and providing them greater economic resilience and independence. So this is really about product design and how you design your products. Sometimes there are unintentional hurdles that affect women and men differently and prevent them from accessing and using your product. So they created a specific fund that looks into improving the flow of capital to women-owned businesses and lowered their cost of capital, which was one of the key hurdles that especially women encountered. And then the last one, I'll be brief on the gender responsive procurement pilots, but basically we worked with the global watch and jewelry sector. And as a first industry-wide effort, it was to embed gender equality in their supply chains. And they started the pilot by mapping key gaps in procurement across the sector and moving from company level pledges to really collective action across the sector, which would actually help to change and have more power to change the global supply chains to advance gender equality and women's empowerment in them. The companies are still engaged and are pursuing the second phase of the pilot, where they are creating a gender responsive procurement tool that is specific to their sector, but will also be useful to other sectors. So these were just some examples of companies and sectors that have made great progress and have learned throughout their journey as well and adapted throughout their journey. We do have some resources for you and for web signatories that help companies advance on their journey. As I said, we've got over 200 on the website, but I did want to highlight the Gender Action Plan module, which is a learning module as well as a template, and it helps companies take the results from the gender gap analysis tool. So to see where the company stands, the Gender Action Plan module helps you develop gender action plans that have strong KPIs so that you know what to measure, but also helps you prioritize based on what is realistic and what is feasible within the current company context. The Gender Responsive Recruitment Checklist has been developed to guide companies to practice gender responsive recruitment. And this might be one of the tools that is sometimes considered an easier win in the sense because it can be used within the HR department or outsourced to recruiting firms to make very quick and impactful tweaks to your recruiting practice. This is only available for web signatories. So if you're not yet a signatory, please do sign on and then you're able to access the resource. The Gender Responsive Procurement Assessment Tool is an example of a tool that tackles an underlying issue and a more complex gender equality issue. And it really helps companies to understand and assess their procurement policies and practices and how where you spend your money and who you partner with can either drive gender equality or maybe is reinforcing existing inequalities. This is again for web signatories. We encourage all web signatories to use the tool themselves and also invite your suppliers to do the same. and that way you can amplify impact across the whole business ecosystem. So all of these tools are available at weps.org on our website, and you can always reach out to us if you have any questions. Fiona, I'll hand over to you again. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Alex, so much for that. So I think that's really helped us to hear then about a number of different approaches companies can take on this and how they're already benefiting from gender equality. So that's great to see, as well as the resources that you can access there. So be sure to take a look at those. So I think one aspect that really is clearly driving interest in this topic for companies is the need to provide transparency on their progress, and also the interest in this topic that we're starting to see from the finance and investment community. We're increasingly seeing gender equality as a factor in the assessment of a company's overall ESG performance. And I'm very pleased to introduce our guest speaker now, who's going to talk to us a little bit more about that topic. Denise Sherdock joins us as the Sustainable Finance Senior Data Analyst in the Bloomberg team. So thanks very much for being here, Denise. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now if you'll be okay to share from your end, but over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Fiona. Quickly setting up. Please give me a moment while I set up my slides.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you. All right. Where's the... Here we go. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Denise Cherdak, and I'm a senior data analyst on the Bloomberg's Gender Equality and Governance team. My primary focus is working on ESG scores, which is something that it's a product that I will talk to you about today. So as we know, in today's ESG landscape, not just in the focus around gender equality, but in general, a lot of like financial participants struggle with the fact that there is so much ESG content, and then there's a lack of standardized definitions and frameworks, but also there's a challenge in evaluating what is financially material, especially when it comes to like gender equality. And so what Bloomberg's aim with ESG scores is to help investors or anyone in the ESG market assess how a company's performance is across the three pillars of environmental, social, and governance data. The scores are materiality based, so you'll see that there are some diversity and gender equality themes and materiality that we include. And the reason why is during the construction of our scores, at the moment the model is pretty much complete, we, in our research in gender-related topics and financially material, we've seen that they are material and a key factor, as Fiona and Alexandra stated, in company success. So I'm going to go into that a little bit more on how you could use our tool to look at and assess a company. So for our agenda, a quick overview, we're going to do an example of one of our financial materiality themes. And then I'm going to walk you through an example of how you can look at gender equality within the ESG scores. And then lastly, I'm going to talk to you about another offering that we have, which is called the Corporate Web Portal. And I'll go into that a little bit more right at the end. So first, I want to start with an example of one of our financial materiality themes, which is women on board. One thing to note is with our team, before we add any materiality to our framework, we do extensive research, and then we partner with Bloomberg Intelligence to back test our research. And in particular, this research that we've looked at from January 2013 to 2026, we have found that a higher share of women on board reduces volatility and supports higher returns across different markets. And we use this by looking at different indexes and looking at the spread. And you can tell, like for example, if we're looking at figure 1 in Europe, companies in the first quintile, or the companies with a higher share of women on board, have a higher return on investment. Now, this is just a quick overview. I'm not going to deep dive because I definitely want to go into the tool a little bit more. But if you are interested in further resources, we have a couple of links for you here on the side. I highly recommend, if you have the time, to take a look. our research teams do quite a bit of work on this. So going into our scores, as I said before, they're materiality based. Our ESG scores are available on the Bloomberg terminal. If you put in the ESG score function, you'll get a pop-up screen. You'll see for a specific company, you'll see what peer distribution it is, what industry, as well as its overall headline ESG score. Now, important to note is the scores range from 0 to 10. So here you see this example company that has a 5.11, which means it hits in the middle of the range. You have in terms of materiality, you can see here on the left hand, this is a materiality map. This is a hierarchical a hierarchy of our method of our materialities that are organized from pillar to issue to sub-issue to theme. You can open these, and I'll show you some examples of the themes, and then you'll also be able to see their weights and how each one contributes to the overall score of a company. So you can look at that from a bottom up. One thing to note is our scoring methodology considers over 30 risk factors and dozens of sub-issues, and it was deemed financially material by industry associations and standard providers such as SASB, for example. So we definitely work with them. Now, I want to give a more practical walkthrough. In this particular example, we're not going to have any specific companies. We're just going to call them Company A and Company B. But that means we're going to take a closer look at how the gender equality data reflects on both sides. We're going to start from the top. So here we have Company A in green at the top, and we have Company B here. Now you see that we've included 2 pillars here. Because a big question that we get for gender equality, or I'm going to say GE, is does gender equality fit into a specific pillar or not? And we've seen through our research that gender equality doesn't fit into one particular pillar. It's important to look at the policies that a company has, as well as the diversity of its workforce. So you see that we kind of straddle both social and governance pillars. So if you take a look at Company A, for instance, social has a score of 3.4, which is, again, between the range of 0 and 10, and their governance is a 5.3. You can also take a look at how they're doing within their peer rank or their industry, and how much information they've disclosed. And as you take a look at Company B, you could see that the social is a 1.56, which is lower than a 3.4, and a governance, which is 6.2. So comparing these, you can assume that maybe the governance policies are a little bit better, but maybe they have better diversity in their social. We're not quite sure yet. We need to dive a little bit deeper. And so we're going to do that. We can open up our pillars and look down into our metrics. Now, social, something to take a look, if I can bring your attention, is not all of our materiality themes within pillars are gender equality related. So for instance, social supply chain management. However, you do see that across the different pillars. So and a perfect example is in governance. We look at the board composition or women on boards, as I brought up earlier. And here we look at that different diversity, not only just age, but gender, and how that impacts our scores and how that impacts a company's governance. So if you take a look here, for Company A, we have an 8.9, which is really high. And then here for Company B, we have a 3. I'm starting to now, and the question then comes, okay, why is Company P getting a 3 while Company A is getting an 8.9? Let's dig a little bit deeper, right? And then we have our final level, which is the data. The data that we build the scores on is raw data that's collected from company disclosed reports. So these are annual reports, CSRs, sustainability reports, anything that a company discloses publicly, which has ESG related content. Also on the terminal, you're able to look at where these data points are tagged to which documents. And that's a link that we've worked on for transparency. So going back to company A and company B, a really good example of how we translate the data that's captured to the scores is percent women on board, right? And this is just a taste of the fields that we have around gender diversity or gender equality. We have a lot more. As you can see, we have numerical fields, but we also have binary fields that also look at different policies. And we have a huge amount, but for this, we're just going to look at percentage of women in different bands of companies. So as you can see here, taking a look, if we're going to compare company A and company B in the same industry, we were looking at why company A had an 8.9. As you can see, they had 44% women on board, which indicates close to parity, or what we say 50%, because we're looking to have a balance between the two genders. Whereas in company B, you're seeing only 20%, right? And you can look at the other bands and the other policies. So one thing to note is this number alone, this metric alone, does not tell you whether or not a company is doing well or is necessarily doing well in gender equality, but it just shows shows whether or not they're headed in the right direction. Yeah? And one thing that ESG scores is really good for is giving you these multiple views of companies of different and how they work in their markets. Because not only do you have a very granular view with the data, you also have a high level view with these ESG scores. Now, we know that our collection of this huge amount of data isn't always perfect, and we wanted to create an opportunity for companies to be able to look at their scores and how we're scoring them, especially if they're off terminal and don't have access to the terminal, and be able to challenge the data points that we've collected. So this is where the corporate web portal comes into play. This is one of our offerings for the companies that we score. What this does is allows companies without the terminal to access their scores and challenge our data points. Each company gets one free account, gets one free account, and they're able to see. And once their account is approved, they're able to see a view such as this. Now, in this example, as soon as they log in, they can look at their scores, and they see their pillars as well as their headline score. So for environmental, social, and governance, you see them across the board. You can also see the hierarchy and the materiality that we talked about, and then also the weight of each materiality theme. You can also change the view to show the data points, as we talked about on slide 8, and that also allow you to challenge them further. All right. And that's the wrap up of ESG scores. If you have any questions, I will drop an email that will have access to the entire for our entire team, and we'll be able to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Denise. Really appreciated. And I think really helpfully illustrates how this data sort of actively starting to play a role in financial decision making. So much appreciated. And as a quick reminder, you can access Denise's content and the email addresses in the chat there, and the contents on the webpage. So thanks everyone for being here. I know we're just very tight on time, so I'm going to wrap the session up quite quickly. We've had a few Menti questions open in the background for you, so please be sure to let us know your thoughts in Menti. Just a quick reminder that we'll be doing part 2 of the training together on Wednesday, so please do join us again for the second part, and you'll then be able to receive your completion certificate. From my side as well, I just want to share the contact details for each of our organizations, which you can find in the presentations and the event page. And of course, to close out with a few thank yous. So in particular, thank you, Denise, for joining us as our guest speaker today. A big thank you to our official supporters at the UNSSE. And of course, in particular, to Alex at UN Women for joining us today, to our colleagues at the IFC and the Egyptian Exchange as well as that. So I see, Mustafa, you're on camera there. I don't know if there was anything you wanted to say quickly, otherwise we can close things out. But no pressure.
Yes, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this session, and thank you so much for our guest speakers for this insightful and deep information and give us like an holistic overview about the gender and the relation with the global markets. It was really a pleasure to have you today, and we are looking forward for the second part of the training next Wednesday, inshallah. So thank you so much, and we are looking forward to have you in the second part. See you soon.
Thank you very much, Mustafa and Maya, as well, for all of your support. So big thank you, of course, everyone for joining us today, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again on Wednesday. So thanks, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Goodbye.